Shokun. Welcome to Igor's Dojo, the training ground for perfecting your Japanese. Today, we will be finishing our Japanese Verbs Revisited Trilogy with the analysis of the irregular verbs Kuru and Suru. However, this video will be a little bit different than the previous ones when we talked about Ichidan and Godan verbs, since we will be using the verb forms from the very beginning in order to remember the stems of Kuru and Suru more easily, because with them there are no groups, kana charts, or special rules for you to follow. You only need to memorize the stems and you're pretty much set up to form any kind of verb form that they have. In case you have missed the previous two videos in my Verbs Revisited Trilogy, I'll put the links to them in the description box below if you want to go back and watch them. With this out of the way, let's get started. Before we dive in deeper into various grammar points, stems, and forms, let's set up some basic groundwork by providing several important notes about the irregular verbs, just enough to see what separates them from the other two groups. The first thing that you will easily notice about the irregular verbs by yourself is that there is only two of them, Kuru and Suru, which makes them the easiest group to remember. The second interesting characteristic of these two verbs is their system of stem acquisition, since unlike the previous two verb groups, Ichidan and Godan, their verb bases can change completely, and their verb stems are immutable, so to speak, because they do not depend on the kana chart like the Godan verbs, and there are no subgroups or vocal changes that occur in the ta and te stem. Another thing I would like to mention here is the considerable frequency with which Kuru and Suru appear in various language expressions, especially in some grammar constructs. This is particularly true for Suru because it forms verbs with many nouns in the Japanese language, such as Benkyou suru, to study, Ryoko suru, to travel, etc. When it comes to Kuru, the most frequent is the attaching of it to verbs, the famous ittekimasu that you might have heard already, basically meaning I'll be coming back. However, all of these are separate topics that we will cover in detail in some future video series, but for now this is enough for you to remember. Now, let's take a brief overview of the stems for Kuru and Suru. As you can see depicted on this table, the stems of the two irregular verbs don't follow any particular pattern, and the best way to master them is through extensive practice by using their most famous suffixes to form certain verb forms, as you can see under the notable suffixes column, where I have listed all of them. So in short, we have the Irali stem, being ko and shi, then the conjunctive stem, ki and shi, the dictionary stem, kuru and suru, conditional stem, kure and sure, the volitional stem, ko and shi, the imperative stem, koi and shiro, and after that the ta or te stem, ki and shi. Don't bother remembering all of them right now, since we will be going through them one pair at a time, with examples to make the memorization process a whole lot easier. So with that in mind, let's get started with our first pair of stems, consisting of the Irali stem and the conjunctive. These two stems have very useful forms which will help you remember them quite easily. The Irali stem forms the negative form with the suffix nai, while the conjunctive forms the famous masu form, which is equivalent to the English future or the present tense. Let's see them in our examples by first taking a look at Kuru. As you can see in our first sentence, Yamada-san wa watashi no party ni konai. Mr. Yamada is not coming to my party is the example of the negative form formed with the Irali stem. In our second sentence, Yamada-san wa watashi no party ni ikimasu. Mr. Yamada is coming to my party is the example of the conjunctive stem that forms the masu form. So it's pretty much simple. Now let's see how does Suru fare. Konya wa tomodachi to benkyou shinai. I will not study with my friends tonight. Once again, an example of the negative form by attaching nai onto the Irali's stem. After that, we have Konya wa tomodachi to benkyou shimasu. I will study with my friends tonight. Once again, we see the conjunctive stem joined with the masu suffix to get the masu form. So, to review, here is the table with the two stems for our irregular verbs. First is the Irali stem, which is ko and shi for Kuru and Suru, and it is the most famous for the negative form. After that, we have the conjunctive stem, which is ki and shi, and the most famous is, like we have seen in our examples, the masu form. So for your, let's say, beginning of the entire process of mastering the stems and the forms of these irregular verbs, it will suffice for now to remember that the Irali stem forms the negative form and that the conjunctive is the most famous for the masu form. Our second stem set is the easiest one to remember in my opinion, the dictionary stem and the conditional stem. Let's see the example sentences before we dive in deeper. Like the previous section, first we have the verb kuru, and it goes as follows. Yamada-san wa watashi no party ni kuru sou desu. It seems that Mr. Yamada is coming to my party. That is the example of the dictionary stem plus the auxiliary so. After that, we see the conditional form. If Mr. Yamada comes to my party, I will definitely talk with him, or in Japanese, Yamada-san wa watashi no party ni kureba zettai kare to hanashimasu. Once again, we see the conditional stem forming the conditional form simply by attaching ba onto the stem. Now let's see Suru. Konya wa tomodachi to benkyou suru sou desu. It seems that I will study with my friends tonight. Once again, the dictionary form plus so. After that, we have Konya wa tomodachi to benkyou sureba nihongo mo renshu shimasu. If I study tonight, I will also practice Japanese. As you might have already noticed, the conditional stem forms the form of the same name with the suffix ba, which is roughly equivalent to the English if. On the other hand, the auxiliary so, which is attached to the dictionary form and is usually translated to the English it looks like or it seems that, is also present in our examples. These are very crude translations of so and ba, but are close enough for the purposes of this video. If you would like to see them covered, drop your suggestion below regarding which one you would like to see examined first, ba or the conditionals, or so and the other auxiliaries. So once again, to summarize the dictionary and conditional stems, the most important thing to take away from this section is that the dictionary form usually goes with so, yo, rashi, and the other auxiliary verbs, while the conditional stem is really the most important one to use, and it's the most famous for forming the ba conditional or the first conditional that you will find it as reference to in many grammar guides or grammar books. So that is really a topic for a future video because it is very intricate and very complex. Now, our third set of stems covers the volitional and the imperative stem. Like before, let's see the examples first with Kuru. Watashi tachi wa Yamada-san no party ni koyou. Let's come to Mr. Yamada's party. After that, we have the example of the imperative. Come to Mr. Yamada's party, or in Japanese, Yamada-san no party ni koi. Now, before we proceed further, I would like to highlight something here. Because when I read the example for the volitional, I said koyo, meaning that the last syllable is lengthened. And that is the most important thing in the volitional. You cannot pronounce it as koyo. You need to say koyo to make that lengthening noticeable in your pronunciation. However, in the imperative case, you need to say it a little bit snappier and quicker than in the case of the volitional by saying koi. Or you will see in the Suru examples by saying shiro. Now, let's see that Suru. Konya wa tomodachi to benkyou shiyou. Let's study with friends tonight. And in case of the imperative, Konya wa benkyou sureba nihongo mo renshu shiro. If you study tonight, practice Japanese too. Now, like I have said, pay attention to the method of pronunciation because it is very, very important. As you can see, the imperative stem in our examples is once again a form in itself without any additional suffixes, while the volitional needs to have the suffix yo in order to properly create the volitional form. When it comes to important details, I will mention that the imperative is certainly considered extremely rude in everyday conversation and writing and not used often, while the volitional can be easily remembered as the equivalent to the English let's, or because it is essentially a call to a certain action. Other than these, there is nothing else particularly important about these stems. So once again, the most important thing here is to remember the method of pronunciation. In the case of the volitional, it is lengthened by using yo, and in the case of the imperative, it is snappier, quicker by saying koi or shiro. And finally, we have the tainted stems, one of the most versatile stems in our stem list. Let's dive into the examples right away to make the subsequent part of the section even more clearer for you. Let's see the verb kuru first. Yamada-san no party ni kite kudasai. Please come to Mr. Yamada's party. After that, we have Megumi-chan wa Yamada-san no party ni kita. Megumi came to Mr. Yamada's party. And before I explain these suffixes and forms, let's see Suru. Natsuyasu michu tomodachi to benkyou shite kudasai. Please study with your friends during the summer vacation. And the final example sentence, Megumi-chan to yuenchi ni satsue shita. I took a picture with Megumi in the amusement park. As you can see, the ta and te are extremely flexible and are used in a variety of grammar constructs, but I have used here the ta stem to form the equivalent to the English simple past tense, while I have picked kudasai to go along with te to illustrate how to form please or requests. These forms are very frequent in everyday Japanese, so that makes them easier to remember, but another thing worth mentioning that will help you in the process of remembering their stems is that the tainted stems of Kuru and Suru are the same as their conjunctive stems, as you can see covered in the earlier part of this video. So what is the most important thing here? The most important thing here is that you master the tainted stem quickly, and I would, let's say, give it a higher priority than all the other stems simply because of their frequency and the amount of, let's say, grammar constructs in which they play a certain part, or set phrases or peculiar phrases. The list goes on. So once again, this stem should be your priority and the practice of it should be extensive and rigorous. And for our grand finale, we have the two tables to illustrate all the stems for Kuru and Suru along with their suffixes, or their most famous suffixes that create various forms. So we have the Irali stem, which creates the negative, konai and shinai. After that we have the conjunctive, which creates the famous masu stem, kimasu and shimasu. After that the dictionary, Kuru and Suru, that usually goes with various auxiliaries. After that we have the conditional, kure and sure. When we attach ba onto it, then we will get the conditional form, kureba and sureba. After these, in the second table, we have the volitional stem, ko. When we attach yo onto it, we have the volitional form, and we have shio as the complete volitional form for the volitional stem shi of the verb suru. After that, we have the imperative koi and shiro, then the ta and te form, respectively being kita and kite and shita and shite. Like I have said previously in the earlier parts of this video, or if you wish, the earlier sections of this video, the best way to learn all of these stems is simply to practice them with all of their most important suffixes to make the process of that easier. It is maybe the most time-consuming method, but it is also the most effective one. So that is my strong recommendation for you to break out a piece of paper, to grab a dictionary, whether it being a book or an app, it doesn't matter, and to pick several verbs to practice them, or in this case to practice Kuru and Suru. Oczkare samadeshta, dear Shokun, for making it to the end of not only the video on the irregular verbs, but on the Verbs Revisited Trilogy. I have put several links to various videos that will help you further on your way to perfecting your Japanese, so I recommend checking them out if you want. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!